Rain fell softly over Little Lagos block, drenching the bright fabrics of market stalls and the laughter of children running for cover under colorful umbrellas. Adoara Nwosu tightened her scarf, clutching Zuri's small hand as they walked past the smell of grilled suya and fresh plantains. 7-year-old Zuri skipped ahead, unbothered by the drizzle, while Adoara's thoughts were elsewhere. The last few months had been relentless. Juggling 2 cleaning jobs, caring for Zuri, and staying one step ahead of Victor Okazi, her abusive ex who had resurfaced with threats, had left her weary. Every night she returned to their modest apartment, scrubbing floors and washing clothes until her arms ached, yet she remained invisible to most of the world. It was that very invisibility that made her job at West Crest Towers, the high-rise owned by Korean businessman Lee Seojin, tolerable. She cleaned the penthouse meticulously, arranging flowers, dusting shelves, folding towels with almost ritual precision. The towering windows reflected the city lights at night, but Seojin never noticed, or so she thought. On a chilly Thursday morning, Adoara arrived earlier than usual, balancing Zuri on her hip while her mop clinked against the floor. The elevator opened to reveal Seojin himself, back from an unannounced early meeting. He paused when his gaze fell on Adoara's wrist, a faint mark, a bruise on her cheek. His brow furrowed, but he said nothing at first, simply watching as Adoara straightened her sleeve and tried to move past him. Her heart raced. "Who did that?" Seojin asked quietly, his voice steady but
How did this happen?
Adoara froze. She wanted to say it was nothing, a clumsy accident, but the weight in his eyes made her pause. "No, it's nothing, sir," she said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the air conditioning. "Nothing," he repeated, his gaze sharp. "You don't need to lie to me." She shook her head quickly, avoiding his eyes. "Really, just clumsy." Seojin's expression softened slightly, though the intensity remained. For the first time in months, Adoara felt seen, not just as the quiet maid who tidied his penthouse, but as a person. Later that evening, the threat she had tried to ignore re-emerged. Victor Okazi waited near the entrance of her building. His eyes narrowed as he spotted her returning from work. "Adoara," he said, voice low but dangerous, "you owe me." "I don't owe you anything," she replied, keeping Zuri close. Victor smirked, stepping closer. "Your daughter, she's lovely. Shame it'd be a pity if anything happened." Adoara stiffened, holding Zuri's hand tighter. From behind, a familiar figure emerged. Kunle, a childhood friend and neighbor, had been walking home from the market. He stepped between Adoara and Victor. "Back off, Victor," Kunle said firmly. Victor's sneer didn't falter. "Last warning." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the wet streets, leaving a cold promise lingering in the air. Zuri shivered. Adoara wrapped an arm around her daughter and whispered, "It's okay. Everything's okay." The following morning, Adoara returned to West Crest Towers. Every step toward the penthouse felt heavier, burdened by fear for Zuri and the constant exhaustion of survival. She moved quietly, her presence almost imperceptible as usual, but Seojin noticed immediately. He lingered at the top of the staircase, observing the way her shoulders hunched and her pace faltered slightly. Without a word, he made a discreet phone call. By the end of the day, through Ms. Shin, the building manager, he had gathered information about Victor. Later that week, a small twist of fate forced their worlds to meet more personally. Adoara had finished her cleaning shift when a sudden rainstorm trapped her and Zuri near the building's entrance. Her umbrella had snapped, and the bus she had intended to catch had left minutes before. Seojin, returning from a late meeting, spotted them struggling with the rain. Without hesitation, he walked over. "You shouldn't be out in this storm," he said calmly, holding out a spare umbrella. Adoara shook her head. "It's fine, really. We'll manage. Zuri tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom, he's nice. Seojin's eyes softened as he crouched slightly to meet Zuri's gaze. Hello, little one. Are you safe? Zuri nodded eagerly, a smile breaking across her face despite the rain. Something about the child's openness melted a small part of the wall Seojin had built around himself over 15 years. I can give you a ride, he offered. Adoara hesitated. His world felt untouchable, dangerous even. But the storm made the decision for her. Okay, she whispered. They walked together to Hanul Pot, a cozy Korean-Nigerian fusion restaurant Seojin had recently invested in. The smell of kimchi jollof rice and suya mandu drifted from the kitchen, blending the smells of their two worlds. Zuri's eyes lit up. Can we try everything? She asked eagerly. Seojin chuckled. If you're hungry enough, we'll start there. Adoara found herself watching him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. He was polite, attentive, and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she had endured daily. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a strange, fragile hope. The meal at Hanul Pot was a quiet but significant turning point. Seojin carefully observed Adoara as she tried the Korean-Nigerian fusion dishes. Her cautious but curious approach reminded him of someone far from his usual world, vulnerable yet resilient. Zuri, oblivious to the tension, jabbed at her suya mandu with delight, squealing when the kimchi jollof made her eyes water slightly. Seojin leaned back, offering her space to breathe while still watching over the mother-daughter duo. You know, he said softly, I've seen many people come and go in this building, but you stand out. Adoara stiffened, unsure whether to feel flattered or suspicious. I'm just trying to do my job, she replied, avoiding his eyes. Sometimes, Seojin continued, it's not about the work. It's about what you bring into a place. Small things, how you notice what others don't. The way you arranged the flowers the first week, for instance, that meant something. Her hands paused mid-bite. She hadn't expected such observation, especially from someone like him, someone whose life seemed untouchable, untouchably rigid. Meanwhile, Victor Okazi had not forgotten Adoara. That same night, he lurked near Little Lagos Block, nursing his bruised ego and plotting his next move. When a neighbor mentioned Seojin's name, Victor frowned. A Korean businessman had nothing to do with him, or so he thought. Back in the penthouse, Seojin was not idle. Quietly, he had his private security team look into Victor. Phone numbers, addresses, social media. Everything was cross-checked. By morning, Victor's threats were already being neutralized before he even realized someone was watching him. The next few days were tense but uneventful at the penthouse. Adoara returned to her cleaning tasks, still wary, still trying to remain invisible. But Seojin's presence was now tangible, though quiet. A folder on her desk, neatly placed, contained small items she had left behind. Her favorite hand lotion, a scarf she had forgotten. Little things meant to show he noticed, without intruding. It was on the fourth evening, after a long day of scrubbing floors and polishing glass panels, that Adoara heard a knock at the penthouse door. Seojin stood there, rain dripping from his overcoat, holding a takeout bag. For you and Zuri. I thought you might need dinner. She blinked. The exhaustion of the day weighed on her, but also something else. Gratitude, disbelief, the strange beginning of trust. You didn't have to. I know, he said lightly, but I wanted to. They ate quietly at the marble countertop. Zuri chattered about school and the friends she had made, asking Seojin questions about Korea, about food, and about the big scary building he lived in. For once, the building seemed less intimidating. A few days later, Victor escalated. A false harassment complaint had been filed, targeting Adoara at her second job. She was called into the office, trembling, unsure how to respond. When she mentioned Seojin, the HR manager raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Lee?" she asked. "Yes," Adoara whispered. Within hours, Seojin intervened. Quiet phone calls, gentle reminders, and the complaint was dismissed without consequence. Adoara left the office, heart hammering, realizing that someone powerful had entered her life, not to control, but to protect. Despite that, she resisted fully trusting him. Old habits die hard, especially when they involve keeping one's vulnerabilities locked away. She worried that accepting help might make her seem weak, dependent, or worse, vulnerable to more harm. Seojin noticed her hesitation and, over the next several days, respected her space. He watched quietly, making adjustments to ensure her safety without being intrusive. But the silence stretched too long. 4 days passed without them speaking, except for brief, formal exchanges at the penthouse. Adoara's fear mingled with frustration. She wanted clarity, yet feared the answers. Seojin, meanwhile, wrestled with his own growing feelings, an emotional vulnerability he hadn't felt in years. The breaking point came one late night. Adoara had stayed behind in the penthouse to finish organizing the linen closet. Seojin appeared at the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice carried a weight, a rare hint of vulnerability. Adoara turned, her pulse quickening. "Yes, I care about you, more than I should, more than I've allowed myself to feel in a long time. And I'm afraid, because I've never been like this with anyone before." Adoara's breath caught. The honesty in his voice, the rawness, broke through years of armor she had built around her own heart. She hesitated, then whispered, I feel the same. I'm scared, but I can't deny it." That night, the threat of Victor loomed once again. He tried to approach Adoara's apartment, unaware that Seojin's security had already been deployed. Within minutes, Victor's attempt was neutralized. No violence, no exposure, just an unmistakable warning that his time of terrorizing Adoara was over. Seojin personally walked Adoara and Zuri home that night, rain falling lightly around them. The streets of Little Lagos Block glimmered with reflections from the wet pavement, neon lights mingling with colorful shop signs. Zuri held Seojin's hand, her little face beaming, bridging the gap between two vastly different worlds. Adoara finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in years, she felt a fragile sense of safety, not just for herself, but for her daughter. The trust she had been reluctant to give was slowly growing, nurtured by Seojin's patient protection and genuine care. Weeks had passed since that rainy night when Seojin walked Adoara and Zuri home. What began as protection had blossomed into something deeper, a relationship built on trust, patience, and genuine care. Adoara's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. With Seojin's quiet support, she had started her own cleaning business, one that operated on principles she held dear: fair wages, dignity, and respect for every worker. She named it We See You, a reflection of her own journey from invisibility to recognition. The business grew steadily. Adoara hired other women from Little Lagos Block, women who had been overlooked and undervalued, just as she had been. Each employee received not just fair pay, but health benefits, flexible schedules for mothers, and training opportunities. The company became known throughout San Verena for its integrity and quality. Seojin watched with quiet pride as Adoara stepped into her power. He had provided the initial investment and business guidance, but the vision, the heart, the execution, that was all hers. He admired how she insisted on maintaining control, on making her own decisions, on building something that reflected her values. Their evenings often ended at Hanol Pot, where they had become regulars. The restaurant staff knew their usual orders: kimchi jollof rice for Zuri, suya mandu for Adoara, and a rotating selection for Seojin, who loved introducing them to new Korean dishes. Zuri thrived in this new stability. The little girl who once lived in fear now laughed freely, played without looking over her shoulder, and dreamed without limits. She had bonded deeply with Seojin, though she never called him father. That felt too formal, too forced. Instead, she simply called him Seojin Oppa, a Korean term of endearment she'd learned meant older brother. He didn't mind. What mattered was the trust and love between them. On weekends, their apartment transformed into a cultural classroom. Seojin would teach Zuri Korean phrases while preparing traditional dishes like bibimbap and tteokbokki. Adoara, in turn, would share Nigerian folk tales, teaching both Seojin and Zuri about Anansi, the spider, and the wisdom of her ancestors. They listened to Afro beats and K-pop, laughing at their attempts to learn each other's dance moves. The apartment itself had changed too. What was once a modest, worn space now felt like home. Seojin had helped with repairs and upgrades, but he always consulted Adoara first, respecting that this was her space, her sanctuary. The walls now displayed both Nigerian art and Korean calligraphy. The kitchen smelled of both jollof rice and kimchi stew. One evening, as they celebrated their first year together, Seojin arranged a small gathering at the penthouse. He had invited close friends, Ms. Shin, the building manager who had helped him gather information about Victor, Kunle, Adoara's childhood friend who had stood up to Victor that fateful night, and a few employees from We See You who had become like family. The penthouse, usually so sleek and impersonal, now buzzed with warmth and laughter. Adoara had arranged flowers throughout the space, her signature touch that had first caught Seojin's attention. The table was laden with fusion dishes from Hanul Pot, a perfect blend of their two worlds. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Seojin, Adoara, and Zuri stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights twinkle below. Zuri had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the excitement. Seojin reached for Adoara's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I never thought I'd feel at home anywhere outside Korea," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of emotional walls. "But this feels like home." Adoara squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It's more than home," she said softly. "It's belonging." They stood in comfortable silence, both aware of how far they'd come. Their journey hadn't been easy. Cultural differences, language barriers, and the judgmental stares from those who didn't understand interracial relationships. But they had persevered, choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, and partnership over isolation. Seojin had also changed. He gradually withdrew from the shadowy aspects of his business dealings, the parts that had once kept him powerful but morally compromised. Adoara never demanded this of him, but her presence, her integrity, had inspired him to want to be better. He shifted his investments toward legitimate ventures, focusing on businesses that uplifted communities rather than exploited them. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or easy. Old contacts questioned his decisions. Some business partners walked away. But Seojin found that the loss of questionable alliances was more than compensated by the gain of genuine relationships and self-respect. Victor never returned. The warning Seojin's security team had delivered was clear and final. But more than that, Victor had heard about Adoara's success, about her thriving business and her powerful partner. Whatever malice he once harbored had been replaced by the realization that Adoara was now untouchable. Not because Seojin controlled her life, but because she had built her own fortress of strength, community, and success. As Adoara looked around the penthouse that evening, at the sleeping Zuri, at Seojin beside her, at the remnants of a celebration filled with people who genuinely cared. She felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had gone from invisible to visible, from victim to victor, from surviving to thriving. "We made it," she whispered, more to herself than to Seojin. "Yes," he replied, his voice firm and warm. "We made it. Together."
I wake up, you're the first thing on my mind. You're my sunshine, you make everything so bright. First thing on my mind, you're my sunshine, you make everything so bright. When I wake up, you're the first thing on my mind. You're my sunshine, you make everything so bright.